So now, without further ado, please give a warm digital welcome to Chris Paxton.
Hello. Thank you so much, Jack. Um, at first I have to laugh with this title because those who know me are like going, "Oh my gosh, she said the word suck." And it was like, no, I think that was intentional to try to get me to say that, which I think is hilarious. But in talking about this, we know as developers and designers that knowledge is power. And it's something we've probably heard of, but this is really only true if everybody has access to it. Now, I have been in this field for a while, and I don't like to calculate the years because that makes me feel old. But originally, it was called distance learning, and again, the newer term is instructional design. But all the terms since 1998, and there's really been some. I consider them kind of nasty rumors going around that developing accessible courses is hard, it's expensive, and it's boring. Or to go with this, it sucks for our learners. And I really want to disprove that, as we really need to ensure that all of our courses are inclusive. They're reaching all learners. They're including all of those with the physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities. So we're going to look at some of those ways, some of the definitions. I'm not going to go into, and I'll show you on some of these into a whole lot of details, because with this you do get a accompanying ebook. And so to ensure that we can meet the diverse needs of all of our learners and make it fun and engaging, because that just makes it all the more interesting. So look ahead, a little about myself again. My name is Chris. I'm in my mid 50s, although I can't say mid for much longer. My pronouns are she and her. I am the CEO and founder of D3 Training Solutions, where we again design, develop, and deliver training. And again, that's how to reach me if you need to. A little bit about my company. As we have been doing this, I've been in the training world, like I said, since 98. Our company's been around, or my company, since it'll be 10 years this March. We do have a YouTube channel of Lectora how-to tips and tricks, and I will be adding a lot more videos here shortly. I've got to make sure, again, they're accessible, so make sure my closed captioning and everything good. And we are also proud we have a e-learning book that I think will also be going out. And this is the big thick one in your follow-up materials. We're also a women-owned hub zone and small diverse business. And when we think about, again, accessibility, kind of really proud that in this last year, I feel like I've won the trifecta, or we've won the trifecta, because we won the Australia LearnX Diamond, the UK's Learning Excellent in a Brandon Hall Bronze Award. And all this was an accessible project developed using ELBX Lectora, and believe it or not, using Scenario VR. I think this is the first project we've ever done where, at least that I know of, where we were able to take virtual reality and make it accessible for even those with visual impairments. So, what is WCAG? Why is it important? Well, you may hear that term WCAG, and I think for me, it's an easier term to say than accessibility, although it's all encompassing. WCAG stands for that Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And why is it important? Well, you may hear terms, again, like WCAG, like ADA. ADA is a physical structures. You may hear Section 508. And this was all created from what's referred to as the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. And I cannot say that any faster. And they're the ones that develop the web standards, such as HTML, CSS. They're also ones who have developed ARIA, which I'll reference actually here in a minute. And they set these global guidelines that are truly followed around the world, which is why I like to refer to it as WCAG, because that's more of a global term, that will make these courses, our content, more accessible to people with disabilities. And we can see here's an ebook. Again, this is one of the two ebooks that I mentioned that will be going out in the follow-up materials. So, has defined by the CDC for Centers of Disease Control a disability, and this, I love this term because it's any condition makes life more difficult. And when I used to be doing more HR work, we would talk about how even pregnancy falls under short-term disability. And I'm like, that just seems kind of odd. But when you look at that term, makes life more difficult or makes things more difficult, it makes a little more sense. So we need to understand this and understand that it is a huge spectrum of disabilities. There are permanent disabilities, which is what most people associate with when we use that term disability. There's also disabilities due to age. While I've always worn glasses and had vision challenges, as I've gotten older, I my prescription is changing, and I actually have several different pairs of glasses depending on what I'm doing. And then there's again those situational disabilities, which could be temporary in nature. Now, a lot of people want to know, why on earth does this even matter? Some people will say it's because of legal compliance. And while that is true, I personally feel that we need to get past that thought or that mantra of we have to do this or we're going to be sued. And if the powers that be want to think that, fine. But as developers, we need to think about it as that thought that we spend a lot of time on our projects and we want it to be used by everybody. And we want to do this to ensure our materials are being inclusive and creating a better learning experience truly for everybody. We want that to be our motivation, not we're going to be sued, in my mind. So, what is accessibility? Again, go through this kind of quickly. The first thing that I always want to stress with people when they're talking about this and they're new is they're like, again, it's hard, it's expensive. And it's like, well, it kind of depends on what you're doing. There are three levels: A, AA, and AAA. And you need to figure out what level is best for you. Okay. Um, AAA, yes, that means you are meeting every single conformance factors at the highest level. This is the most restrictive, and guess what? It's not the one recommended for most as a general policy. Now, at the community college I teach at, I haven't even done a few of my courses. We've done AAA because in AAA, I'm also going to have a sign language interpreter. I'm going to have, all of these different things, but that is not recommended. So I will say the biggest thing for you to do is know who your audience is. Most people, when they start out, they're doing A, which means it's that minimal accessibility. It's primarily, again, the visual and hearing limitations. Basically, your screen readers are working. That's not necessarily the best practice. What we recommend would be, again, that AA, which is a good, happy medium in designing, which also in just a moment. And when we're doing this, we're basically talking about kind of four areas. We're talking about visual. Most people say blind, and that's true. But what about low vision, farsightedness, nearsightedness, astigmatism, glaucoma? Or again, what about a distracted student? And again, that student can be an adult student or a youth student. They've got all these things visually attracting them or distracting them. So, how are we going to keep their attention? Then we've got hearing. Again, we automatically, people assume deafness, but what about hard of hearing or hearing loss? Or what if someone just has an ear infection and they're taking it? Or what if they're in a noisy environment? We are not always in this nice, quiet environment to listen to things. So, what if they're in a bartender or at an airport and they're doing these things? We've got our motor. Since this references physical impairment, as developers for e-learning, we are primarily concerned with the dexterity affecting the learners using the mouse and the keyboard. So, and touchpads, computer screens, things like that. So, in reference to that, we need to think about loss or damage to limbs, arthritis, paralysis, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, cerebral palsy. I'm actually, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to get more of a little shake in my hands. It's those type of items, which again could affect everybody, but then also those situational. What happens if they break the wrist and they happen to be right-handed? Okay, what do they do? Then there's also again those cognitive, like such as Down syndrome, neurodiverse, such as dyslexia, ADHD, psychological, mental health, loss of memory, and so forth. So when we think about these things, we need to think about all of them. Now, WCAG, jumped ahead here. Actually, in 2008, they took all the guidelines and put them into 14 principles, which was referred to as POUR. And again, not going to spend a whole lot of time. It is in the book, but we're going to look at these just a little bit closer because you can see we've got these three: perceivable, operational, understandable. And I've got one that's kind of bolded more, which is robust, because that's the one that focuses on the end user, focuses on the technology that delivers the content. And so that is a lot of what we focus on. So, what is perceivable? Well, this means they have to be able to take in that content in one way or the other. So, either they can see the content, they can hear it. It cannot be invisible to all human senses. So, let's say you have some text and there are important words that are highlighted in a different color, but the learner can't distinguish between the colors. That means that learner could be missing crucial information. So your content isn't perceivable. So we're looking at those items. A lot of times there's a social media thing, actually, even recently, talking about how Depending on the computer you're using, the font's going to change. So turn it into artwork. And I'm like, no, 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 because again, screen reader's not going to read that because it's now considered an artwork. Now there's workarounds to that, but that's not a good practice to get into. Do you have synchronized captions? Do you identify the speakers, describe any relevant background? And I think that's kind of fun to actually put in. We did one where it's like fish jumping in the water and making bloop bloop sounds, and and you just describe it. So the voiceover explains what's going on in the visuals. The transcript, do you have a transcript available? Does a learner have control over all the actions and to control the audio? Are they, again, those things accessible, and are they labeled correctly? And I'm just going to keep going there. Are they able to pause and hide animations, especially if that goes over 5 seconds long? And then one of the areas that a lot of people were challenged is are they labeled correctly? And when screen reader users, there's some amazing videos on YouTube to go out and kind of watch how they use them if you've never seen someone use a screen reader, and they will teach you kind of an overview of how they use it. And they're so used to the internet. And so in the internet, things are labeled H1 for the main heading, H2 for a secondary heading, and so forth through H6. Well, we need to do the same thing. Those logical headings need to be labeled. Lists need to be labeled. Tables need to be labeled. I have on those. There, yeah. And the same is true when it comes to color contrast. I mentioned that earlier, but are we using color only to express meaning or identify an object? And is there some way of secondary indicator to have them going up? Okay, have a question coming in. Am I muted? I am not. So that's just the one. Hopefully someone will answer that. Let me know if you are having trouble hearing me. I'm not getting any notices that my internet is slow, because sometimes that does happen because I am in rural Oklahoma. So what are these? So when talking about WCAG again, there's a contrast level, and I'll actually go into that a little bit more here in a moment too. The O stands for operational. Again, how is the functionality? And we're going to go into these a little more detail. But basically, when I talk to people, I say, put the mouse aside, put the keyboard aside. I've had some people when they're new, they're like, well, I actually even just put a mask over my eyes. I'm like, if that works for you to experience, go for it. I just take my glasses off and I can't see anything. So, are we doing things, and are they actually able to use? Is it operatable for them? Is the navigation consistent? We'll talk more about that here in a moment. Are the button size, and this is another area, are the button size a decent size? Not just for the visual, but again, if you've got that trimmer and you're trying to use that mouse and to click on it, they can click the wrong thing. And the progress indicators, are there multiple ways that they can see that? And again, have samples. Understandable. What about your writing style? And this is the one that probably caused a lot of controversy for many people, is the writing style. It needs to be able to be comprehend for all understandable language ages and such. So the learner needs to be clear and simple language. Now, I was a journalism major back in the 90s, and they taught us then to write at an 8th grade level. And people would get so upset going, oh my gosh, but I can read better than that. Well, I hate to tell you, it's gone even lower now. It's now to 6th grade level. And it's not because people aren't smart. It's not because people can't understand. I like to think of it as we're inundated with all kinds of information, and our brain is making, if you went to the last session, I can't wait to finish it. I had to step out at the end, but the brain is constantly processing all that information. So we have to be able to help the brain process. And that's part of our job as developers. So writing at that lower level isn't saying anyone is stupid or dumb, but it's helping them understand what you need them to. This can also work many ways, because what if you have English as a second language? What if you have people that are, again, on the different scales? So there's a lot of great ways. Whoops, I guess I need to keep clicking here. That we need to make sure with our writing style. There's also the text. What font type are you using? What size are you using? How is it aligned? A lot of people like to center things, and center, it makes it hard for that comprehension and along with the reading and the process. So, go ahead and do things justified, which means aligned to the left and over. Use headings and paragraphs. Use the actual bullets that are built into the tool versus putting some decorative bullet out there, because that throws wonky things up on screen readers too. Okay. And again, the content. So the first three principles, the POU focused on that end user. The last one focuses on the technology that delivers the content. So this means that technology that has to be able, and the devices in general, they have to remain available to users, and they have to, have to use a tool that, it, to me, is dedicated to accessibility and is going to keep up with the latest thing. So our content must be robust enough it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of assistive technology. So that means using good, well-tested coding practices, which is a lot of stuff behind the scenes that I don't want to actually have to even worry about. Kind of on through there, it's best to understand, maybe if you can, to have a brief understanding of how people use that assistive technology, because it can just help us think a little bit more of what they're going through. Had a great question. Is Open Sans the best font? It really depends. There is a lot of misnomers out there that says, you need to use serif fonts or you need to use sans serif fonts. And ages ago, when the computer monitors weren't the quality that they're at now, it really did make a difference. But I know in the print industry, you want to use things, this, I can never get it. Serif is without. So you want to use things with the feet because it would help the lines follow. I know for myself with my dyslexia, I like to have the lines there because it helps me follow, and I don't skip ahead so much. As long as your font is big enough, years ago when I first started in this, they would say 10 point, 10 to 12, and now I'm like 14 point minimum. And then when you also have to take into account people are using devices and it's getting larger and smaller, that 14 point could actually be even smaller. So the font size, Open Sans, I think, is a good font. The biggest challenge I run into with fonts is to make sure it's a font that's available on not only PCs, but also on Apple products, iOS. And you can go out and take a look, because otherwise, no matter what font you pick, if it's Open Sans, if it is not on their computer, it's going to switch to whatever their default font is, which is going to change the alignment. Is there recent research that support explains this more detail? Yes, there is, and I don't have it in front of me, but we can take a note on that. So, sorry, I'm reading the questions as they come through too. So again, when we're talking about the poor, go out and get a sample if you can. NVDA is free. Go ahead and download that. It stands for your non-visual desktop access, or JAWS, job access with speech. They are assistive technologies. They're just two assistive technologies that are out there, primarily used by people with vision impairments. What they're going to do is actually convert the text, the buttons, the images, all those screen elements into either speech or braille. And this is where we have to think about those hidden content that's placed off screen and things like that that can aid learners, which is some of the things we did in making sure things were accessible. Okay, now I usually, if this was when we were doing this at DevLearn, I always ask people by show of hands. We can't really do show of hands. Well, maybe we could. Anyway, my question is, have you ever worked with people, and it happens to me all the time, that say they don't need accessible content because they don't have anyone that is blind or deaf? And I'm putting those words in quotes because I hear that all the time. So yes, please feel free to respond in the chat if you've ever encountered that. And that may be the case in your workforce. And it often is with many of the groups I work with, especially if I'm onboarding a new client. Okay. So I want to give you three questions, and these, if you've sat through my sessions before, you've seen these three questions because, oh, it says chat's disabled. Oh, so maybe,
Let me work on getting that chat enabled for everyone.
okay.
Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. I wondered why nothing was coming through. I love these three questions, and I always share them each time because I think they're really important to help people see it's more than just legal, and it's more than just blind or deaf. So think about your current workforce. And again, this could be the total employees, this could be contractors, and you may need to write these questions down and go back to it. But think about how many total people you have working there, or how many total people will be taking any of your courses. Then think about, and if you've sat through my sessions before, before well, it used to be 26%. In the last year, the CDC just released this year, it's now 28.7. So that number's actually gone up. And again, I always say I think this number is going to go up even more. So what is 28.7% of the total number of people who are taking your courses? Then think about how many people are over the age of 40. So again, y'all can reply now if y'all have ever encountered no one is deaf or blind in the webinar chat. It's now enabled. So how many people are over the age of 40? And again, don't go around and ask people, that would be inappropriate, but you can go up to HR and get a report just to get an idea because they'll know without identifying exactly who it is. All the hands are going up, exactly. And then how many people are assigned male at birth, or AMAB, which basically means they have that XY chromosome, okay? Or genetically males, or however you want to describe it. But basically, we're looking for how many people have an XY chromosome. Now, you may be thinking, oh my gosh, why are you asking these? Well, it's because if we look at these numbers a little closer, 28.7% of Americans, so granted it's the US, but have at least one disability. And that went up as of July of 2024. And I really think as we go into this more, that number is just going to go up even higher because many people just don't feel safe and comfortable releasing their disability. And many people may not think of it as a disability. I grew up not thinking my vision was a disability or dyslexia. I mean, it is, and you just learn to deal with it. So it's something for a long time I wouldn't release myself. When we think about over the age of 40, beginning in the early to mid 40s, and you can't stop it, many adults, basically the lens starts getting harder, and it makes reading and working on a computer very challenging. And guess what? We're mostly reading and working on a computer, and this is all talking about classes being offered online. So we run into that challenge. Then we think about that XY chromosome, those that have that XY chromosome, everyone, of course, sees color a little differently, every single person, even people who aren't colorblind. But those with that XY chromosome are genetically more likely to be colorblind, or the correct term is CVD, color vision deficiency. It is 1 in 12 men, or basically 8% of men, and it's 1 in 200 women. And I love this little chart here because it kind of shows some of the different types of color blindness, because I'm not colorblind that I know of. And so it's interesting seeing this and to see what those differences are. So now that we have a bit more knowledge about accessibility, when you think about what accessibility means within your company, again, that 28% of your workforce, those that are over 40, those with the XY chromosome, who do you visualize as having an impairment, and has that visualization changed? And I hope the answer is yes. And hopefully this will give you some tools so you can help others see what accessibility means. Okay. So let's continue on to kind of some of the fun stuff here. What are some tools and techniques for testing? And then look at some samples. Continue on. Okay, I mentioned MVDA and JAWS. It helps to understand how our courses work for those using the assistive technologies. These, again, are the two most popular ones, and it's really would be kind of, I think, find it helpful to understand how different screen readers react to the tool, and also how they can be adjusted or set with different things like ARIA, which I'll explain in just a moment. Now, MVDA I mentioned is free. JAWS has recently come out. I want to say it was in the last year and a half. They've lowered the pricing. So it's actually a little more affordable, even for small companies, single developers, just to get it kind of for testing purposes. And so I think that's handy because the majority of people with the vision impairments are actually going to use JAWS. MVDA, and then there's some challenges. So I'm going to bring up this term ARIA. How many of y'all have heard the term ARIA? And not the opera. La la. You don't want me singing. Okay. Well, ARIA, I've got a couple hands. Okay, I hope the thumbs up was because you've heard of Aria, not my singing. So it's a web thingy. Exactly. That is exactly right. It is a thingy developed by again, by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. They're the ones who developed the standards like the HTML. Well, they've also developed this Aria. And Aria basically is some additional coding or markup that can actually go into HTML to communicate basically the roles, the states, the properties of different user interface items for assistive technology. That's the whole purpose of it. It was first introduced in 2008. 1.2 came out in 2023, and they're actually working on 1.23 or 1.3. But the thing about this is, and I love this, there were some cool sessions about it again at DevLearn. But just to understand a little bit, I know enough to be dangerous, but there's some trouble. Like NVDA has trouble reading sometimes with screen readers because it isn't quite as up to date with it, has JAWS. And so sometimes it will hear things and it will announce things as blank, or it'll announce things, it'll start reading things in the middle of different things. And that's because, from again, what this person said at the conference, MBTA tries to be all things to everything, whereas JAWS really focuses on kind of that e-learning. So there's different settings that you can do things like ARIA hidden, which means if it's announcing blank, you can go in and kind of change it to where it doesn't say blank. There's ARIA polite and ARIA rude, and those are the two I remember because I'm like, what? Where polite means if something appears on the screen, it will wait till the screen reader is finished reading the first item, and then it will be polite and read it afterwards. Rude means it's just plugs it in right in the middle and it overlaps. So some really interesting things that can be adjusted through ARIA, but understanding your tool can really help out. The other thing with accessibility is, again, keyboard navigation. And this is probably the easiest because all you need to do is put down your mouse and set it aside and just use your keyboard. And here we're talking about using the tab, the shift, the space bar, the arrows, the alt, page up, page down. And there is a link. Well, it's in the ebook that you'll be getting, that talks about how to install and how to work through all this. And as a developer, it really just means you set your mouse aside and you test your course and use your keyboard to navigate around it. Okay, you can actually adjust this. Can I type? I think I can. I'm going to, if you're curious as to how to do this, let's see, host panelists. I need to change this to, oh, I don't know if I can send to all.
You should be able to send it all in the chat if you just select everyone.
Okay, I see host and panelist and Zach.
All right, feel free to send it to me and I'll send it to everyone.
Okay, perfect. Okay, let me copy this. Actually, I'm gonna copy two things here. I'll copy this link, and it's there. Well, it's not wanting to copy. Okay, we'll send it, include it in the follow-up. So, but it's basically how to go out and set up your accessibility. It's really, you just go to control panel on your computer, ease of access, and change how your keyboard works. And that can adjust your settings so you'll be using the keyboard more like those that aren't using a mouse. Okay. Now, what are some things we can do? Now, in these examples I'm going to be showing you, we had some challenges, of course, to make sure it's accessible. But to me, the bigger challenge wasn't the accessibility. It was that it had to appeal to teens and young adults. And I don't know about you all, but trying to make anything look cool and interesting to people between the ages of 13 and 22, big challenge. And there's a couple different programs that I'm going to show you that it not only appealed to them, and by we're talking appealing, that's primarily our visual users was in the survey, but it also was accessible. So this was a course we had, and we had 7 modules. And while there were different colors were used for each of the module for visual differences, color was not used in any messaging. It was just kind of this subtle thing going on. And we can see from here, I've got my colors, and then we can see it's the same kind of design. It just had some color kind of on the top. To make sure it was that clear and legible font, we used Trebuchet, and I never know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but we used with a minimum font size of 14 point, period. And I tried never to go even lower than that. We always tested all of our fonts, which this sample is not my LO7 that was, we actually ended up changing it to black because obviously that did not meet the color contrast. But you can go out to WebAM and you can plug in your hex codes and it will let you know whether things are color contrast. And this is real handy to know because sometimes there are, if clients are like, well, here's my colors that I need to use. And you're like, great, these aren't accessible. Well, marketing says I have to use them. I realize that, but these aren't accessible. And us saying they aren't accessible is one thing, but if I can give people a report from like WebAM, um, that usually seems to help quite a bit. And hang on, I'm going to show you. See, minimize there, bring this up. So here's kind of the sample. So we can see here's my colors at the top. This didn't change. Well, it changed per course, but other than that, it's just that basic design. Let me go back. Okay. Clear, consistent navigation. Why we designed and create, and this is one of those I see a lot of new people like, oh, we want to do things different. We want to change this up. And I get it because as developers, we're looking at this over and over again, and it does get boring for us as developers. But for our end users, they just want to get through the class and want to get done. And so, and as humans, we like consistency. So we really had to make sure that things were not only consistent throughout the entire 7 modules, but that they could actually, they were meeting that contrast and things were at the same place. So the other thing we also did is we introduced, and a lot of people are like, oh, you shouldn't have to do that. And I'm like, I see what you're saying because again, your students go through it over and over again, but what happens when you get a new hire or what happens when you get someone new coming in and this is their first course? If they don't know where all the navigation is and what things are, what are you going to do? So I always like including the skip navigation. So I'm going to actually minimize this because this is one of those things people wanted to see at DevLearn. So go here. So again, as a beginning, we always ask, and I'll see this in a moment, the course contains audio. If you want the audio to play automatically, click play audio. If you don't, if you want to control it yourselves, click continue. Okay, so that way it puts now, and this is evolved years ago. We would actually say things like, if you're using a screen reader or assistive technology, do this. Yeah, we don't do that anymore, thank goodness. But there's different ways that we can set this up. So I'll say play audio. And then I've got, how to navigate. So I could skip if I want, or I could go through and it just kind of points out where everything is. Okay. And then it
Between
continues.
school,
Whoops.
work, family, and
Ah,
friends, you have a lot of
stop.
things going on.
There. Okay. So let's go back here. Okay, text alternatives. Well, in this particular course, the audio and videos weren't used on every page of the training. The user, again, did receive the audio warning at the beginning, which you saw. Okay, and the program also placed what we refer to as skip navigation at the project level for the program to allow the user to skip because you don't want them hearing Plan My Ride logo, lesson 2, this logo, here, this, that. You don't want them hearing that every time. They just want to get to the content. So again, tying that in with those HTML text types of H1 through 6 allows them to be able to skip around to the content, to the meat of the content, which is again what they want to do. We also used, and if I'm building a accessible course that has to go through a DHS trusted tester, I will build in Lectora. If and it's pretty much the only thing I would build on because it's a lot harder and it takes a lot longer to build in some of the other tools because accessibility doesn't seem to be their priority. Although, and again, that's just my opinion here from doing this for a long time. But there's a lot of features creating the accessible content. So one of the things I always recommend is again, turn on, make sure what language you're sending it at. Use your web accessibility settings, which your tools should have where you can set that up. Then also just double check your focus color. And I usually look at a color wheel and someone had a great question come in, where can I go to find the best colors to use before I begin a project? Yeah, it's a good question. You can go out. I've got some pages that I've got bookmarked include marketing trends and interior design trends on what some of those color trends are going to be for the next couple of years. And a lot of times I'll look at that to get inspired by colors. And then I have a color wheel, which may be behind me, that I use and for like I look at kind of where things fall on that color wheel for the accents and then the opposite usually for my focus color. Does the skip to content jump to the first H1 text block on each page? Or does there need to be one H1 text block? It really depends on how you build it. In this particular course here, let me go back. I have, I'm sorry, the lesson 1 is my H1. And so I do not have it jumping to that each time. I have it jumping to an H2, which is on the particular page, which would be that page title. So it really just depends on how you build it and how you want to build it. So great question. Okay, go back. Okay. Let's see. Ensure again the keyboard navigation. And with Lectora, I like to think of this as a deck of cards, laying one down and then the next. So the first card I laid down, we'll say this is Busy Highway at Sunset. That's going to be the first thing that keyboard navigation is going to hit, and it's going to be the first thing the screen reader hits. The next one, dark rectangle. I have a tendency to put empty alt tag. When I'm building stuff next to it, I'm probably very OCD when it comes to labeling, because I know a week, a month, a year, sometimes 3 years later, I'm probably going to have to go back into this project. And the better I have things labeled, the more it saves me time in the long run. So I have a tendency to put empty alt tag or EA, empty E alt type of thing. So I know that, yes, I've already flagged that for empty alt tag. It doesn't need it. Hands on a steering wheel would be the next thing that, again, the screen reader or the tabbing, what they would hit. So setting those up. Yeah, Daryl. Oh, hey, Daryl. Yes, label. And I think it comes from you. You put in my head over and over, label, label, label. And so, yes, I label, label, label. So, and when it comes to some other global standards include the requirement that all non-decorative images would have descriptive alt text. And I think that depends if it's needed. If it's decorative and it's just there to be pretty, then have an empty alt text. It doesn't need to be read to the screen readers. We've got some very dear friends who are developers and screen reader users, and they're like, we don't care that it's a pretty flower. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking that out. If it's not needed for them to get the content, take it out, because we do have a lot of just visual stuff on there for our visual users. The cool thing I like about Lectora is when I download, and I have a tendency to go into ELBLearning's asset library directly versus just doing it through Lectora, and I'll download several images to kind of follow my theme for several pages. And as I save them with the alt text that I want used. And so that way, when I bring it in to the course, that name, which you can kind of see here, a woman in wheelchair, it says image, blah, blah, blah. And this, we substitute some things. I would actually save the file name has a woman in a wheelchair, blah, 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 instead of image 195574817 JPEG, because that way it automatically incorporates that into the alt text, which can be very handy. Great question. Is it necessary to use both empty alt text and area hidden equals true for decorative object? That really depends. If they're using JAWS, no, it's not. If they're using a MediaE, yeah, you might have to go in and adjust the area to hidden true, because it hasn't kept up with it. But again, most screen reader users, it's mostly testers is what I have found that use NVDA. Most actually screen reader users use JAWS, and in that case, it's not needed. So, okay, great question. And let me know if you need clarification. Okay, so adding and testing, again, the closed caption. Any pages that contain audio or video always include an option for those closed captionings. I prefer using the VTT files, and in this particular example, we did it using rev.com and their AI transcript and caption creator, and then we verified it to make sure that it was accurate. And the videos themselves not only include closed captioning, which we can see some of the videos here, but it also, I had to go back and add audio descriptions such as horn honking, fish splashing in water, to really let them have that complete description of the video and what all was going on. We also used Lectora's HTML extensions to set the closed captioning, because we wanted it to be a little bigger. So we wanted it to be 24 point, and we wanted longer captioning space. And again, this is all stuff that you can adjust. And if you attended one of my DevLearn sessions, I also talked about library objects. And this is all some great coding that I didn't write the code. I'm not a code writer, but it was written for me. And so I save it as a library object and I can reuse it all the time. Looks lovely. What did we use to create it? This particular animation they used, because this project took 2 years, and I'd have to go back and look at the notes we had. I was the only developer once it got to this portion, but I know we had, I think, 3 different animation companies. We actually even hired a mime. This was all paid for through a government grant for research. And I believe they all used Adobe Illustrator. I think it's the Adobe. I know they used Adobe. What are some of the best caption generators? They're not all created equal. I really love Rev. And one of the reasons I love Rev is it is, it's a monthly subscription, so I can pay for it when I need it. And their AI conversion is really pretty good. I mean, and I can add words, like it doesn't get the word lectora right. It doesn't get, it could be Adobe After Effects. It doesn't get, I mean, there's certain words it doesn't get right, but you can add it to the library and it memorizes that stuff. So I absolutely love it. How much editing do you typically do on the VTT file for closed captionings? I do very little, but again, I've been using rev.com, and when I first start a project, it seems like I'm having to do quite a bit. And if you watch our videos on using Lectora, ELBLearning does not come through rev.com. Lectora does not come through rev.com. My name, Chrisana, does not come through rev.com. But I've been able to add those into the library. And so once I add it into the library, it's so the first time I'm doing new stuff, it takes me a little longer. But then after I've added it into the library, it's really, really quick. So how accurate do I make all the names, grammar? I have a minor in English, so I usually do things pretty accurately. And part of that is, again, for the screen readers to read it. And I just know myself, I get frustrated when I see poor grammar. So, okay. Again, use accessibility checkers. Now, in this case, Lectora has a built one. I know many DHS trusted testers, if you're getting that, they'll talk about using Andy, ANDI. These are great tools, but please do not limit yourself just to the tools. They can be run at any time. They're great for catching things that may need further attention, but you really need to understand and you really need to go through it yourself because it's not going to be as good as a human. Okay, it's just not. It can not determine if you've appropriately provided synchronized captions within your project, but it can detect that those animations or videos exist. And so it lets you know. So I really encourage you to use your own testing too. Some best practices, they're close here too, is again, as Daryl mentioned earlier, is the naming in order. Items are named not to where not only you can identify them, because again, how often do you have to go back and edit a course a week, a month, a year later, but that others in your department can. Go ahead and name the items, images, buttons, and everything really as they should be. And go ahead and place in the keyboard friendly tabbing order. Even my clients who don't want necessarily accessible content, their courses are pretty much built, definitely level A, almost level double A. They don't necessarily have the closed captioning in there just because it's a best practice. It doesn't take me any more additional time when I'm thinking about it in the building, and it will help in the long run. And I really think that's one of the reasons in thinking about this and labeling. So thank you, Daryl, for brainwashing me with this. Is that I have like one of my first clients, it was a month contract, and that was 9.5 years ago. And they just always come back. They're like, nope, we know you'll get it done. We know it's done correctly. They can have other developers look at stuff and things are fine. So I would strongly get into that best practice. Create a style guide. If you do not have a style guide, create one. They were originally created to create, again, that consistent look and feel for a business, but can also be a great way to ensure that you look at things accurately and to the standards requirement with your LMS. Create templates. I love templates. I love library objects, which is kind of the next one here. If I can save things that I can reuse again, why not? Let the tools work for us and make our lives easier. One of the things again, going back to the brain study is not only at 40 does your cognitive lens start changing or your lens eye lens start hardening, but our cognitive processes start changing. And so we need to do what we can to have the tools work for us and to keep our brains sharp. So engaging and what worked. So again, in addition to the challenge of this all being accessible, our bigger challenge was that we had to make sure it appealed to young teens. So in doing so, we had to create a program that was appealing, engaging to that target audience. This was all about learning to drive, and not necessarily a driver's ed course, but due to how to kind of prepare you for the peer pressure of driving. And that would be, driving essentials, avoid distracted, refuse to drink and drive. And some of the brain studies, I'll have to get back with you because some of it comes from this group, because it is a research group and they're all PhDs. It was in psychology, and I, it's amazing to work with them. I don't understand half of what they say when they go into a lot of it though. But we can see here's kind of some images from the front. We created videos, and we also, to help with so we have a cohesive, still yet eclectic look, but we also helped with the continuity. We had 3 teens. These are hired actors, actresses, that are featured throughout the program. These young teens were specifically chosen for their acting ability, their visual age appearance, their sound, and they really guide the participants through the course, sharing thoughts and stories, including their experiences about learning to drive, being in a car accident, poor decision making, which again was all scripted. It's not necessarily their life story. So, um, we also created some micro learning boosters, and these are created to reinforce the e-learning, and they were delivered at 2, 4, 6, and 8 weeks after completing the initial 7 modules of the course. They were about 5 minutes long for a total of 20 minutes. And we can see again a lot of animation in here, a lot of reflections, scrolling design, minimal graphics, large buttons, a lot of real simple animation tools. And then we also wanted to incorporate virtual reality using 360. And we knew a workaround had to be needed because everybody's like, well, you can't, VR isn't accessible for the visual impaired. And it's like, well, VR A is accessible for some, for people who cannot leave their house, for people or certain things like I don't travel a whole lot anymore. VR can allow people to experience things, but you're right, it is not accessible for the vision impaired. So what we actually did is to accommodate these videos and ensure accessibility, we incorporated very long descriptions of the 360 videos that were not visual or visible to visual learners. We put it at zero opacity, and it enabled the people using screen readers to have that full experience using assistive technology without the user having to do anything different. So these videos were placed within Lectura, again supplemented with that zero opacity, and they were actually able to go through it all, and was very excited about being able to do this, including having the questions in there. So they were able to go through, and it helped since we already did the script because that's what we used for the visual descriptions. We also created, to again make it fun for the visual users, we created a secondary, um, oh, good grief, my brain, custom progress bar. So every page that they advanced, the little car just advanced along the way. And I would say the hardest part of this was just doing the math to calculate the percentage of how far the car needed to advance, because I don't do math. But this is in addition to for the screen readers. So this was for those visual. Then we also created, again, we're consistent by using the Plan My Ride was the name of the program, steering wheel logo, and we had this wheelie character who appears throughout the program. Now, a lot of people are like, wait a minute, you can't use a GIF, and you can use it if they stop playing after a certain number of flashes or within 5 seconds. And he was tied into with the screen reader and would just time itself out. I did not in the PowerPoint. So a great question, Kay here. What's the idea for zero opacity? Wouldn't that make reading text difficult? Yes, the zero opacity is so it doesn't appear for the visual learners. It is only recognizable by the screen readers. So we also did things a little different. We used a lot of bold colors, designed lots of artwork, images, and engaging what I consider engaging activities. We created a Mad Libs. I've never created a Mad Libs before, but this was really cool. We asked a series of questions and it was kind of goofy, but by the end, they had this custom Mad Libs where, again, I'm going to send a carrier pigeon and say, I need a ride at 7 and a ride home tonight. I will respond, may the force be with you. And again, it's goofy and it makes them laugh, but if you laugh, you remember things better. The knowledge checks and interactions, some of them were very typical with the true, false, multiple response, fill in the blank, which we all know those are accessible. And we can see some samples of them here. But we also went through, and this is a little more challenging, but it's definitely doable, to create hotspots where these look like they are hotspots, these bottom two. They're actually multiple choice, okay, behind the scenes. So for a screen reader user, it will act just like a multiple choice question. They can read, they know everything that's going on. But for my visual users, it just looks a little different. And all interactions, of course, included instructions with a submit button. And then the errors were described to the end users. And again, some additional, we said there were no timed elements, but in the lower image down here, I do have one timed element that the participant controlled, and it was basically asking them, how long do you think it takes? How long is your eye away from your, when you're driving, how long is your eye off driving and at your phone when you are reading a text? And they would go through, and if people could ask, or you could start a timer, and then we had a fake text message here and figured out, then they stopped it to see how long it would actually take. So not a real timer, but kind of sort of. And then again, just more interactions, but everything was still using multiple choice, fill in the blanks. We had a lot of that zero opacity going on there. So my recap for all of this, and to me, the praise from teens and young adults was amazing. They said things like videos were very well thought out, enjoyed to watch. One of them said it wasn't boring or lame. And I'm like, okay, that's good. And then it wasn't cheesy. So it's just really exciting. You can do some things, I promise you, you can, to make the accessible courses where they don't suck and they can be engaging. So, questions?
Chris, we have one question here
Mhm.
in the question and answer. Can you please share the brain study to which you are referring?
I will have to get with IRT, who is they're all the research scientists, because I don't know off the top of my head, but I can ask them and get back to you on that for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
So if you want to send me a note, hang on, I think I have. Oh, one of the questions was different links. So you will have access to, in the follow-up, there's two ebooks that I have more information on: Making eLearning Accessible, and then a combination with Brandon Hall, Accessibility and Inclusion. And there's also a Lectora ebook out there available on Amazon. There's I may have, yeah, there's my contact information if you need to reach me. And I'll go back to another question. Between zero opacity text and 100% opacity text that is off screen, not on a Lectora page, is one better than the other? Oh, great question. Okay, what they're referring to, let me get out of I think what you're referring to is the zero opacity text, which would be, okay, think of this as the white page as the page, and 100% is off screen. Okay, here is text off screen. Let me minimize this. I love using my off-screen notes, and you can see I have all my colors on here that I use, so I can see them on every page and I can grab it. I also have notes to myself as to what the different font sizes. If it is off screen, if it is not actually on the page, the screen readers won't recognize it. So your answer is one better than the other? Yes and no. If it's off screen, it's better for notes for yourself as a placeholder. If it is on screen, it would, because if I put this here, whoops, I just had it on group, the screen reader would not recognize it. But as soon as I take it off screen, the screen reader doesn't recognize it. So they're both good, but they can't be used for the same thing, if that makes sense.
Okay. And with that, we need to draw this webinar to a
Yep.
close. Chris, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your just amazing insight and experience in this part of the industry.
Great. I do. Can I plug in one? My Mac screen reader does read off screen. NVDA and JAWS does not, because what if you're using your built-in screen reader, it's reading whatever's on the screen itself. It's not built for e-learning type of thing, because the coding and stuff's a little different. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Zach, for hosting. And if you have questions, reach out. Love to hear from you.